drama. Now on ITV, it's the news at 10.
At least 5 British tourists are among 37 massacred on a beach in Tunisia. The Foreign Office warns tonight that the British death toll may well rise as holidaymakers talk of the horror on the beach and at the pool.
I looked at my wife and she got up and ran, and as I turned, the bullet just hit me in my arm.
Tonight, these pictures emerged of the single gunman hunting for more victims before he was shot dead.
Also on the programme, France moves to its highest level of terror alert after a man's decapitated by a suspected Islamist near Lyon.
The US Supreme Court declares same-sex marriage to be legal as campaigners celebrate all 50 states must comply.
And the Queen lays a wreath at Bergen-Belsen, the Nazi concentration camp liberated by British troops 70 years ago.
This is ITV News at 10 with James Mates and Charlene White.
Good evening. At least 5 Britons are tonight known to be among those who died when at least one terrorist gunman slaughtered 37 holidaymakers in Tunisia. The Foreign Office says the number of British dead is likely to rise. Many of the holidaymakers had settled in for a day on the beach when the attacker pulled out a Kalashnikov hidden in a parasol and sprayed them with bullets as they lay on their sunbeds. It happened in the city of Sousse, one of the country's most popular Mediterranean resorts. The massacre took place on the beach between the Soviva and Imperial Mahaba hotels. Our reporter Neil Connery is in Sousse tonight.
There is shock, fear and disbelief at what has happened here during this painful day. Tourists, families, children on a beach enjoying a holiday, confronted by unimaginable terror. As the day has gone on, the toll of those killed and injured has risen. Our correspondent Paul Davis has our first report tonight. I must warn you that it does contain disturbing images.
It was the day the fanatics brought their twisted view of the world to the beach. In the chaotic aftermath of the slaughter, a sunbed becomes a makeshift stretcher as a female tourist, wounded but alive, is carried towards medical attention. But on the sand covered in towels, the bodies of dozens who were not so fortunate. Witnesses say the gunman had walked through the sunshades, firing indiscriminately. British, Irish, German and Belgian holidaymakers murdered where they'd been sunbathing. These 2 young women from Yorkshire saw a man who'd been posing as a tourist produce a gun.
The gunman was 100 metres from us and he dropped an umbrella, then started shooting around. We realised that it was a gun. I stand up, shouted, "Gun, run." Everybody didn't believe me, thought it was fireworks at first, and once they realised people screaming, everybody scarpered, people falling on the floor, people trampling all over them.
The girls fled to their hotel, but the killer followed them.
He comes into our hotel, has a gun, starts firing it downstairs. We all scarper into rooms, hiding in anywhere possible.
Some Britons barricaded their rooms with mattresses and beds until the shooting stopped. The Tunisian authorities say the 37 who died and the many more who were injured were from 6 different countries. The Foreign Office says it is anticipating that many of the victims will be British because the hotels involved are popular with British travel companies. Tunisian television broadcast these pictures showing what it says is a wounded Briton who ran into the sea to escape.
The bullet just hit me in my arm and I just ran to the sea. And I ran in and held in the sea. My wife ran to the hotel and I just saw the gunman firing shots randomly at people laying on the sunbeds on the beach.
This is how it ended. An unknown number of gunmen chased into the side streets behind the beach. One was shot dead. At least 2 others were arrested. This man subjected to the fury of the crowd as he was being taken away. Tonight, the first of the victims was named, Irish nurse Loma Carty, who was on holiday with her husband. Tourists are being told it is safe to venture outside again, but many are saying their only wish is to return home as soon as possible. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Neil, you have met some of the people who survived this attack.
Yes, James, hundreds of British tourists caught up in what has been happening here today. I'm pleased to say that we're joined by one of them now, Donna Crouch. You were on the beach at lunchtime, Donna. Can you just put in your own words what you actually saw?
We just went for a walk and we heard what we thought was fireworks. I turned around and I seen this guy about 30, 40 yards away with a gun just shooting at all the sunbeds. I didn't think it was real, and then everybody was shouting, "Run, run," so everybody just ran to the hotels, and everybody just ran into the hotels basically. There was people still in the water. It was just mayhem.
How terrifying was it for everyone watching all of this?
It didn't seem surreal at first, but when you realised it was real, then shock set in. A lot of people were upset, crying, the staff were upset.
Is it possible to describe the aftermath and how people rallied round and came together in the face of this?
The hotel staff were really good. All the tourists got together and everybody was upset. Some people want to go home. They're still in shock, I think.
What's the mood like tonight amongst the tourists inside the hotel?
They're all anxious. Got families at home that are worried about them, so they're phoning home. Families are phoning them. But still in shock.
And how difficult has this been for you? I mean, I think you arrived on Wednesday, didn't you?
We only arrived 2 days ago, yeah. It's not what you expect when you go on holiday, is it? It's a quiet beach, just having a stroll and a mad gunman. No, it's not what you expect.
Donna, thank you very much for joining us at the end of a very difficult and painful day for everybody here. We'll have more from Seuss later in the programme. In the meantime, it's back to you in London.
Neil and Donna, thank you very much indeed.
David Cameron today condemned the attack as sickening, saying his heart was with the families of British victims. The attack could badly damage Tunisia's image, which is so important to the country's economy. Thousands of foreigners fighting for jihadist groups are also known to come from there. Rohit Khatru now on Tunisia's growing terrorist problem.
Tunisia's Bloody Friday, when this country, championed by the West for democratic transition, was terrified by Islamist militancy. The president spoke tonight. We have repeatedly said that Tunisia is in a war against terrorism. The birthplace of the Arab Spring, the lighthouse of the region, might be known to us for beach holidays before political conflict, but it's provided rich rewards to Islamic State recruiters. Here, one Tunisian militant pledges to return. We will come back to raise the flag of Islam, he says. Part of the problem is next door. This Islamic State video showed Christians being slaughtered in Libya on the shores of the Mediterranean. It may have been the biggest success of the Arab Spring, but Tunisia is also thought to have produced at least 3,000 jihadists, more than any other country. They're now believed to be fighting for Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Other Tunisian jihadists are thought to have links to Ansar al-Sharia in neighbouring Libya and to Akbar ibn Nafar, an offshoot of al-Qaeda in the mountains bordering Algeria. It's believed that as many as 500 fighters may have slipped back into Tunisia undetected by the country's security services. From David Cameron, an offer of assistance, replicating the sort of pledge we've heard before.
We've got to do all we can to help. That means cooperating on counter-terrorism, building our capacity on counter-terrorism. It means dealing with the threat at source.
Today's attacks have sown fear in Tunisia and prompted grief in Britain too. on a day a global problem was felt on many continents.
And as a direct result of today's attack, police in the UK have announced extra security measures for major public events this weekend. Rohit's here in the studio with us. What more can you tell us about these measures?
Well, Charlene, a busy weekend here in London, and as you might expect, that attack in Tunisia and attacks elsewhere around the world today have caused the police and the security services to think a little more about the way that those events are being policed. And this is what Scotland Yard told us earlier this evening.
As we approach a weekend of a number of celebration events, including Armed Forces Day and Pride London, we have been keeping the security at those events constantly under review. And we will be putting additional security measures in place to protect the public and also to reassure them.
Frequently we have sat here and discussed the threat of Islamist terrorism. This is not a threat isolated to Syria or to Iraq. I think what today has illustrated with the killing of at least 5 British tourists in Tunisia is that this is a universal problem, and if anything, it's a problem that is growing for all countries.
OK, Rohit, thanks very much.
A British Embassy crisis team is tonight on its way to Tunisia to help Britons caught up in the massacre. Up until today, the Foreign Office advice was that Tunisia's resorts are normally safe to visit. But holidaymakers in Sousse were today being warned to stay indoors. Our consumer editor Chris Choi reports.
This is a promotional video showing the hotel in Sousse at the centre of today's attack. And within the last few hours, new tourist flights have set out to this part of Tunisia. But at Gatwick, some tourists due to leave tonight have chosen not to travel.
When they said they couldn't guarantee our safety when we were out there, and we learnt that Sousse had a 7-mile cut-off zone anyway. You couldn't actually go into Sousse, and that's where we were going.
We know of more than 100 tourists who did fly out tonight. There are 20,000 UK travellers in Tunisia at the moment, a destination sold by the main UK tour operators. It attracts 420,000 British travellers a year, and long before today, the risks were clear. This footage, filmed by a holidaymaker, shows the moment 2 gunmen started shooting at Tunisia's Bardo Museum 3 months ago. 23 were killed. The Foreign Office said further attacks were possible, but crucially did not advise against holiday travel.
The problem with travel advisories has been the case since the Egyptian revolution back in 2010. Very little information, and as we found out back then, holidaymakers just did not know what to make of it. And the real issue is that travel companies hide behind the advices given by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
In 2013, a suicide bomber attacked in Sousse. And last November, Tunisia was among 225 countries where Foreign Office guidance was updated, telling travellers to be vigilant.
Unfortunately, it's fair to say that you can't say hand on heart that any destination in the world is 100% safe from terrorism. It's an appalling act of cowardice, really, to target people in this way. But unfortunately, it is a reflection of the world we live in.
Tonight, social networks are carrying messages from relatives desperate for news. Tunisia's holiday trade has been shattered possibly for years. The greatest casualties are the innocent victims, but tourism itself will be hit hard as travellers become targets. Chris Choi, ITV News.
A major terrorist alert is also underway in France tonight after an attack on an American-owned gas factory. A suspected Islamist extremist is being questioned tonight after the decapitated head of his boss was found at the factory gates. It happened 25 miles southeast of Lyon on an industrial estate in Saint-Quentin-Fallavier, where the Air Products factory is situated. Rebecca Barry has the story.
Shrouded in black, this was the scene of a gruesome discovery. At 9:30 this morning, there was an explosion as a car was rammed into gas canisters at this chemicals factory near Lyon. Then, a man's severed head was found on the railings outside, along with 2 flags with Arabic writing. On hearing the news, the French president returned from the EU summit in Brussels.
Face à ces risques, face à ces menaces, At these moments, faced with these tests, these risks, these threats, it is the duty of France to come together and to fight against terrorism with the greatest effect.
4 people have been detained, including the main suspect, his sister and his wife. Before her arrest, she gave an interview to a French radio station. They say it's a terrorist act, she says, but it's not possible. I know him. He's my husband. We have a normal family life. Police are now searching his home near Lyon. Prosecutors have confirmed he was a delivery driver and the man he killed was his boss. Here's what we know about the suspect so far. Yassin Salih is 35 years old. He has no criminal record, but he was known to the security services and was investigated in 2006 for alleged ties to Islamic extremists. But the surveillance was stopped in 2008. France still hasn't recovered from the wounds of its last major terrorist attack. It's less than 6 months since the Charlie Hebdo shootings, in which 17 people were killed. The violence sparked acts of solidarity in France and around the world. So news of another suspected Islamist attack has hit this country especially hard. The motive remains unclear, but the authorities are treating it as an act of terror and have raised security in this part of France to its highest possible level. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
And in a third shocking terrorist attack, 25 people were killed and more than 200 injured in a suicide bomb blast at a crowded mosque in Kuwait. A terror group said to be affiliated to Islamic State say they carried out the assault on the Shia mosque, where some 2,000 people were attending Friday prayers.
Still to come on the programme, a first look at tomorrow's front pages. Plus, a historic day in the United States as same-sex marriage is made legal.
And the legacy of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Human remains are found today.
Barack Obama spoke of his pride tonight at the decision by the Supreme Court to legalise same-sex marriages across the nation. When all Americans are treated as equal, he said, we are all more free.
The president said it means the dignity of marriage can be offered to everyone, regardless of who they love. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore now on an historic ruling.
They have waited not years, but decades for this moment. Activists and supporters of gay rights in America, suddenly, even unexpectedly, triumphant.
USA! USA!
This Supreme Court ruling will permit gay marriage across all 50 states, leaving many outside the court deeply emotional.
Civil right!
What does this say about America today?
It says that in our country, there's always room for progress. There's always room to move forward. There's always room to make wrongs right. And we did that today.
This is a hugely significant political, legal, and especially cultural moment in America. Perhaps a recognition by the Supreme Court that public opinion on this issue has now moved decisively. The president acknowledged it has been a long, tortuous struggle.
And then sometimes there are days like this, when that slow, steady effort is rewarded with justice that arrives like a thunderbolt.
That thunderbolt was celebrated in communities across America. This was the scene outside San Francisco's City Hall. And in bars, the anxiety of a long wait for equality was replaced by a profound sense of being accepted. It is changing lives immediately. In Texas, George Harris and Jack Evans, who have been together for 54 years, today finally married.
This is a big day for everybody.
This Tennessee couple were among those who brought the case to the Supreme Court.
We didn't set out to make history.
And as social evolution happens, as legalization happens, it will just allow people to get to that place of feeling safe enough to make that decision for themselves.
Your hatred is covered by your false love.
Opponents of same-sex marriage will continue to be heard, especially in socially conservative parts of America. But for gay Americans who have long yearned for recognition, history has been made here today. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
A convicted murderer who escaped from a New York prison 3 weeks ago has reportedly been shot and killed. The New York Times claims that Richard Matt was shot near Lake Titus, close to the Canadian border. A massive manhunt is still underway for another killer who escaped at the same time.
And thousands of people attended the funeral of the church pastor who was shot dead along with 8 of his flock in Charleston last week. President Obama gave the eulogy for the Reverend Clementa Pinckney, describing him as a friend and a good man.
The long torment of waiting for the families of 2 men who vanished from Belfast more than 40 years ago could be over tonight. Human remains unearthed in remote countryside in the Irish Republic are thought to be those of 2 men murdered and secretly buried by the IRA. Peter Smith reports.
Northern Ireland has built a road to peace, but the dark secrets of awful deeds in its recent past are buried in a shallow grave. In 30 years of the Troubles, more than 3,600 were killed, 16 simply vanished, believed executed by Republicans. They are the disappeared. Based on a tip-off, investigators were today searching for Joe Linsky. Instead, the dig uncovered 2 bodies, believed to be those of Seamus Wright and this man, Kevin McKee. He was abducted at 17 years old. His family say the disappearance inflicted decades of pain.
My mother was just tortured all her life. Absolute torture, thinking that her son would have come home someday. And to think that she's going to be reunited with him now. But the sad thing is she's in the grave with him now.
McKee was taken in 1972, one of the most violent years of a conflict fought by nationalist Republicans and loyalists in Northern Ireland. In the peace process, some old wounds have been reopened, bringing mixed feelings for victims' families.
Sadness that it confirms their loved ones have been murdered, abducted and murdered, but elation in as much as they will get some closure at the end of all this.
It could take weeks before DNA tests can bring that closure for families, proving who has been found and who remains disappeared. Peter Smith, ITV News.
A father and his 2 sons have been remanded in custody, charged with murder over a fire at a flat which killed 2 teenagers and a baby. Amy Smith, her 6-month-old daughter Ruby Grace Gaunt and family friend Edward Green all died following the blaze in Derbyshire last Sunday.
And Britain's double Olympic medalist Mo Farah said today he'd continue working with his coach Alberto Salazar. Mr. Salazar has denied recent claims of being involved in doping. Farah said he wanted to focus on training hard to win medals.
The Queen made a personal pilgrimage on the last day of her visit to Germany today to pay her respects at the site of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. There she met a survivor from the camp where 70,000 people died and one of the British soldiers who helped liberate it. Our royal editor Tim Hewitt was there.
The Queen particularly wanted to make this journey in a year marking the 70th anniversary of the end of the war. Belsen is a place that has come to symbolise its worst atrocities. Back then, she was a teenager, in uniform as a mechanic, but like the rest of the country, horrified by what British troops encountered when they arrived at the camp.
Inside the gates of the Belsen concentration camp is a city of the living dead.
The soldiers found sick and emaciated prisoners and bodies everywhere. Belsen had no need of gas chambers. 70,000 people perished here, 14,000 of them so ill they died after liberation. There were liberators here and survivors. Anita Lasker-Wallfisch, who now lives in London, was a teenage German Jew sent first to Auschwitz, then to Belsen.
The difference between Auschwitz and the Belsen to me is that in Auschwitz they had the most sophisticated way of murdering people. Clean, sanitized, They didn't need this in Belsen. You just perished here. You came here to die.
Captain Eric Brown, now 96, then a young soldier, was brought in as a military interpreter.
It was really like walking into Dante's Inferno. I've never seen anything like it. We estimated about 10,000 bodies lying around, and they were all over the place.
Those who died at Belsen were buried in mass graves. This one contains 2,500 bodies. The SS destroyed the camp records, and so we know the identities of fewer than half of those who were sent here. The royal couple paused at Belsen's Jewish memorial and at the stone placed in memory of Anne Frank and her sister Margot, who, along with their mother, both died here. Then she laid a wreath at the camp's inscription wall, honouring the dead and keeping the memory alive. The Queen has this week reflected on the need for unity and peace across Europe. This was a fitting setting to end her tour and underline that message. Tim Ewart, ITV News, Bergen-Belsen.
Tomorrow's front pages are dominated by the outrage in Tunisia. The Guardian's headline is "Massacre on the Beach." It says the killer came from the sea to launch the attack. A very similar headline in the Times, which describes a bloody rampage in a luxury beachfront hotel. The Mail picks up on the horror of the holidaymakers on their sunbeds being suddenly confronted by a gun-wielding terrorist. It also says UK police have been put on high alert.
Well, let's return to that top story now. The terrorist attack in Tunisia, that's on the front of all those newspapers, where 37 holidaymakers, including at least 5 Britons, have died. Well, Neil Connery joins us once again from that resort of Sousse. Now, Neil, you've been there for a few hours now. What's it like there tonight?
Well, I must start by telling you there are now officials from the British Embassy who travelled down from Tunis. They're inside this hotel complex now, along with holiday reps from the various companies involved. I've seen them talking with the tourists here, who understandably are in a terrible state of shock given the events that have unfolded here during the day. They are fearful as well. And what's been really striking has been the increase in security around South throughout the day, but particularly this evening. In relation to what has happened here. They are really trying to show a force of strength here, if you like, in the wake of what has happened. But a very difficult day for people to comprehend here. And from the Tunisian perspective as well, one Tunisian man I spoke to said to me that this attack does not speak for his country. He said that Tunisians were outraged and shocked by what had taken place here. The enormity of what has been lost here and the effect of all of this, the shockwaves from what happened on this beach just a few hundred yards behind this hotel at lunchtime today is really now sinking in for the families of those affected. And the thoughts of everyone here tonight are with the families of those who've lost their lives and who have been injured in this terrible attack.
Neil, thank you.
They were terrible moments which will be hard to erase from the minds of those who endured them. The faces of those who survived etched with what they witnessed. In their panic to escape, they had abandoned everything.
Fear and chaos reigned in the streets of the resort. Good night.
Take a trip across the top of the world. My epic journey takes us from my childhood home of Hong Kong. I'm on the peak of the world. To Russia, where I modelled in my early career. It's unbelievably cold here. So join me, Joanna Lumley, on my Trans-Siberian adventure, coming soon to ITV.
You stink.
No matter what the weather.
Not me.
Green Flag Breakdown Response sponsors the ITV National Weather.
Hello there, very good evening to you. It's finally Friday, the weekend now just around the corner. And as we look ahead to tomorrow, we do so on a fairly summery note across many parts of the UK. But we do have a band of rain taking its time to clear away from us on Sunday, so perhaps not looking quite so good for the second half of the weekend. So the detail then, starting with tomorrow, as I mentioned, plenty of brightness around, largely dry. A few showers there across Northern Ireland and Scotland. The remnants of an old rain band across the Northern Isles of Scotland. And the next rain band can just be seen there creeping into Northern Ireland for the second half of tomorrow. But despite that, we are going to be seeing some good temperatures across the board. 21 there across Northern Ireland, 25 to the southeast. Then for Sunday, more in the way of cloud and rain, but slowly clearing off the scene for next week. Good night.
Green Flag Breakdown Response sponsors the ITV National Weather.